The moment that forced me to rethink my entire garden was surprisingly simple. One afternoon, I stood at the edge of my potato patch, looking down a 30-foot row, and quietly asked myself a question. Am I wasting space? For years I had followed the same routine. Every spring, I'd mark out a long trench, 4 to 6 inches deep. Seed potatoes went in, spaced along the row. Soil covered them. When plants reached 6 inches, I hilled them once, sometimes again later in the season. It worked. Most years I harvested between 40 and 50 pounds from that row, roughly 1 to 2 pounds per plant. For a long time, I considered that a respectable result. But the more I looked at that 30-foot stretch of ground, the more it felt inefficient. Nearly a quarter of my garden dedicated to one crop. A lot of effort, a lot of space. Then I saw something that quietly changed my thinking. In Holmes County, Ohio, beside an old barn, there was a simple structure. Nothing complicated. Just a cylinder made from wire fencing, about 2 feet across and maybe 3 feet tall. At harvest time, the owner walked over, clipped a few ties, and let the wire cylinder open. The entire column of material fell outward. Potatoes rolled out from multiple layers inside the structure. I started counting. 10, 20, 30, 40. I reached 50 and stopped counting. All of it from a structure occupying less than 4 square feet of ground. That moment forced me to reconsider something fundamental. For nearly 20 years, I'd been growing potatoes the way most gardeners are taught. But I had also been unknowingly limiting what the plant could do. Understanding why requires looking at the plant itself. Most of us grow up hearing the same simplified explanation. Potatoes grow underground. While technically true, that description hides the real mechanism. Potatoes do not simply swell along the roots. They form on structures called stolons. Stolons are horizontal stems that grow outward from the plant's main stem beneath the soil surface. At the tips of those stolons, tubers develop. The detail that matters most is where those stolons originate. They do not grow from the roots. They grow from sections of the stem that are buried beneath the soil. That single detail changes how you look at potato production. If stolons only emerge from buried stem, then the length of stem below the surface determines how many potential tubers the plant can create. The longer that buried section becomes, the more opportunities the plant has to form potatoes. Traditional rail planting rarely takes advantage of this. You plant the seed piece. Hill soil once when the plant is 6 inches tall, and sometimes add a second hill later in the season. In total, the plant may end up with only a few inches of buried stem beyond the original planting depth. In other words, the plant only produces one primary production zone. The vertical system works differently. Instead of burying the plant once, you repeat the process throughout the season. Each time the plant grows 8 to 10 inches taller, another 4 to 6 inches of compost or soil is added around the stem. The plant is partially buried again. Then it grows upward. Then it is buried again. This cycle repeats 3 or 4 times over the course of the season. Each layer creates a new buried section of stem, and each buried section has the potential to generate additional stolons. Instead of one production zone, the plant develops several stacked along the same vertical stem. The footprint on the ground never changes. The production simply rises upward. What appears to be a clever gardening trick is actually something much simpler. It is an adjustment based on plant biology. But once you understand that buried stem length drives production, another question naturally follows. If the system depends on how the plant responds to deeper hilling, do all potato varieties behave the same way? That question turns out to be more important than the tower itself, and choosing the wrong variety can quietly undermine the entire system before it even begins. Before anyone builds a tower or gathers materials, it helps to understand a simple truth that many gardeners overlook. Not every potato variety responds the same way to vertical growing. The structure itself is only a tool. The real driver of production is the plant's genetic tendency to produce tubers along buried stem. In everyday gardening language, potatoes are often divided into 2 practical categories. Some varieties form most of their tubers close to the base of the plant. Once those tubers develop, additional soil piled higher around the stem does not significantly increase production. The plant simply continues growing upward. while most of the potatoes remain clustered near the original planting level. Varieties such as Yukon Gold or Red Norland are common examples of this behavior. They are reliable potatoes, widely available, and well suited for traditional planting methods. But when they are grown in a tower system, the results usually look very similar to what you would get in a regular garden bed. Even if the plant is buried several times as it grows, the plant tends to produce only one primary layer of potatoes. This is where many people become disappointed with vertical growing. They build the structure correctly, add compost at the right intervals, and maintain good watering practices. Yet the harvest does not look dramatically different from a standard row. The reason is rarely the tower itself. More often, it is the variety. Other potatoes behave differently. Certain varieties continue producing stolons along newly buried sections of the stem as the plant grows taller. When additional material is added around the stem, the plant treats that new buried section as an opportunity to extend its underground network. New stolons form, and each one carries the potential to develop another tuber. This response is what makes vertical growing possible. Varieties known for this behavior include Russet Burbank, German Butterball, Elba, and Kennebec. These types tend to respond well to repeated hilling, and they are commonly favored when gardeners attempt to grow potatoes in towers or deep mounds. The structure does not force the plant to produce more potatoes. It simply gives the right varieties the conditions they need to express what they are already capable of doing. There is another detail worth addressing before planting begins. Many people are tempted to use potatoes from the grocery store as seed. At first glance, it seems practical. If a potato sprouts in your pantry, it feels natural to plant it and see what happens. The problem is that most commercially sold potatoes are treated with sprout inhibitors to extend their shelf life during storage and transport. Even when they do begin to sprout, their vitality is often reduced compared to certified seed potatoes. A vertical system places a lot of demand on the plant. Multiple layers of growth require consistent energy and strong early development. If the seed lacks vigor, the plant may struggle long before the tower reaches its full height. Using certified seed potatoes increases the chance that each piece will produce strong shoots and maintain steady growth throughout the season. Once the right variety has been selected and healthy seed potatoes are in hand, the next step might seem obvious. Most gardeners feel the urge to plant immediately, but there is a quiet preparation step that often determines whether those seed pieces succeed or fail in the damp environment of a tower. The way seed potatoes are prepared in the days before planting can make the difference between strong early growth and a slow start that never fully recovers. 2 or 3 days before planting, take the seed potatoes and cut them into pieces roughly the size of a large egg. Each piece should contain at least 2 healthy eyes. These eyes are the growing points where new shoots will emerge. The stored energy inside the potato piece supports the young plant during its first stages of growth, so the pieces should not be cut too small. After cutting, the pieces should not be planted immediately. Fresh cuts expose moist internal tissue, and if those pieces are placed directly into damp compost or soil, they can absorb too much moisture and begin to rot before they ever sprout. Instead, spread the cut pieces out in a single layer in a cool, shaded place with good airflow. Over the next couple of days, the cut surfaces will gradually dry and form a protective skin. This process is called callousing. Think of it as the potato forming its own natural bandage. That thin protective layer significantly reduces the risk of rot or fungal infection once the seed pieces are buried. It also allows the plant to direct its energy into sprouting rather than repairing damage. For a standard tower about 2 feet in diameter, 4 to 5 pounds of seed potatoes is usually enough. That amount supports the initial planting layer and the additional layers that will develop as the tower grows upward. Once those calloused seed pieces are ready, the planting stage begins. And at that point, the tower itself becomes more than a simple structure. It becomes the framework that allows the plant's natural growth pattern to unfold vertically. The design of that structure matters more than it might appear at first glance, because the size, stability, and airflow of the tower will determine how well the entire system functions over the coming months. Once the right seed potatoes are prepared, attention shifts to the structure that will hold the entire system together. The goal of a potato tower is not to build something complicated. The goal is to create a small, stable environment that allows the plant to extend its buried stem upward over time. In most home gardens, a tower about 2 feet in diameter and roughly 3 feet tall provides a practical balance between productivity and stability. That size may appear modest, but it allows the plant enough vertical space to complete several hilling cycles while still keeping the structure compact. To build it, a simple section of welded wire fencing works well. Openings around 2 by 4 inches are usually ideal. The wire is strong enough to hold its shape once filled with compost and straw, yet open enough to allow airflow through the sides. Cut a section long enough to roll into a cylinder approximately 2 feet across. Once the circle is formed, secure the ends together using heavy wire ties or short pieces of baling wire. The finished structure does not need to be elaborate. It simply needs to hold its shape through the growing season. When placed on the ground, this tower occupies only 3 to 4 square feet of space. Compared to a traditional potato row stretching 20 or 30 feet across a garden, the difference is significant. The same crop that once required a long strip of soil can now grow in a compact footprint. The height of the tower is just as important as its width. 3 feet may seem like an arbitrary number, but it reflects a practical limit. As compost and straw are added throughout the season, the structure becomes heavier. A tower that is too tall can become unstable once it is fully loaded with moist material. At the same time, 3 feet of vertical space provides enough room for 3 or 4 hilling cycles. Each time a new layer is added, the buried portion of the stem becomes longer. That buried stem is where new stolons develop and where new potatoes eventually form. Instead of spreading the crop outward across the garden, production is stacked upward within the same footprint. This approach reflects a broader principle that applies far beyond potatoes. Many systems become more efficient when they begin working with natural processes instead of pushing against them. The tower does not force the plant to behave differently. It simply provides a structure that aligns with the plant's existing biology. Before placing seed potatoes into the tower, it is worth pausing for a moment to evaluate where that structure will sit in the yard. Location plays a quiet but decisive role in how productive the system becomes. Potatoes are full sun plants. For steady growth and strong tuber formation, the tower should receive at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight each day. A small amount of afternoon shade usually does not cause serious problems, but heavy shade limits photosynthesis. And photosynthesis is the engine that powers the plant's entire production cycle. The leaves capture sunlight and convert it into energy, which the plant sends downward to support stolon growth and tuber development. When sunlight is reduced, the plant simply produces less energy. That reduction often appears later as smaller or fewer potatoes. The ground beneath the tower also deserves attention. It should be level and firm before the structure is placed. Over the course of the season, the compost and straw inside the tower will absorb water and become heavier. A structure that begins slightly tilted can slowly shift as that weight increases. Setting the tower on solid, even ground keeps it balanced and prevents small problems from growing into larger ones later in the season. Drainage is another quiet factor that influences success. Potatoes prefer evenly moist conditions, but they do not tolerate standing water. If water collects around the base of the tower, the risk of rot increases and fungal problems become more likely. A well-drained location allows moisture to pass through the system while still keeping the root zone comfortably damp. Once the tower stands in a sunny, stable location, the next step is to create the internal environment that will support the plant's early growth. This begins with the base layer, which acts as both a support structure and a drainage zone for everything that will develop above it. Inside the tower, the bottom edge is lined with 10 to 12 inches of straw, packed gently along the sides. This layer serves 2 quiet but important purposes. It prevents compost from spilling through the wire openings, and it allows air to move through the lower section of the structure. That airflow reduces the chance of excess moisture collecting at the base. Above this layer, the first planting mixture is added. About 6 inches of compost, blended with straw or loose garden soil, creates a light, well-drained medium where the roots will establish and the first stolons will begin forming. Once that layer is ready, the seed pieces can finally be placed into position. And with that step, the tower stops being just a structure. It becomes the starting point of a vertical growing cycle that will slowly build upward over the next several months. Once the tower is standing in the right location and the base materials are ready, The first planting layer becomes the foundation for everything that follows. At this stage, the goal is not speed, but stability. What happens in the bottom 12 inches of the tower will influence the health of the plant for the entire season. After lining the inside edges with straw, add roughly 6 inches of a loose growing mixture. A balanced blend of compost and straw works well, or compost mixed with light garden soil. The important quality is texture. The material should feel airy and loose in the hand, able to hold moisture while still allowing excess water to drain away. This first layer is where the root system begins to establish. It is also where the earlier stolons will form once the plant starts to grow. Rich organic matter here gives the plant a strong beginning, and strong beginnings tend to compound as the season continues. Once the base layer is in place, the seed pieces can be positioned. Place 4 to 5 seed potato pieces evenly across the surface of the compost mixture. Space them so each plant has room to develop without competing too heavily with its neighbors. Each piece should sit with the eyes facing upward. These eyes are the points where the shoots will emerge and begin moving toward the light. After positioning the seed pieces, cover them with another 4 to 6 inches of the same compost mixture. At this stage, they should be completely buried. Water the layer gently but thoroughly so the entire section becomes evenly moist. When finished, the tower will usually stand around 12 inches tall. Then comes the waiting period. Depending on soil temperature, green shoots normally appear within 1 to 2 weeks. Those first shoots are more than simple growth. They are the signal that the vertical system can begin functioning as intended. As the stems reach 8 to 10 inches above the surface, the first hilling cycle begins. Another 4 to 6 inches of compost and straw mixture is added around the stems. Most of the stem is buried again, but 3 to 4 inches of green foliage are left exposed at the top. That exposed section allows the plant to continue capturing sunlight and producing energy through photosynthesis. Beneath the surface, something important is happening. The newly buried section of stem begins responding to its environment. Along that covered portion, the plant can produce additional stolons. Each one represents another opportunity for a potato to form later in the season. Once the plant grows upward again, the process repeats. Every 2 to 3 weeks, as the stems extend beyond the surface, another layer of material is added. Each layer gently buries more stem while leaving a small section of leaves exposed. Over the course of a typical growing season, this process is repeated 3 or 4 times. By the end of it, the tower stands close to 3 feet tall. From the outside, it looks like a simple column of compost and straw. Inside, however, the buried stem now extends through multiple levels. Instead of one small zone of production near the base, the plant has developed several stacked layers where tubers can form. While the tower is growing upward, a few practical habits help keep the system stable. Moisture is the first. Unlike an in-ground bed, a tower does not have surrounding soil acting as a moisture buffer. Air moves freely through the sides of the structure, which means it can dry more quickly, especially in warm weather. A simple way to monitor moisture is to check the material about 3 inches below the surface. If it feels dry at that depth, the tower should be watered deeply, so moisture reaches the lower layers. Consistent moisture encourages steady growth and reduces the chance of misshapen or cracked potatoes. Nutrition is the second consideration. Well-aged compost provides most of the nutrients potatoes need. If the compost is rich and balanced, additional feeding may be minimal. Some gardeners choose to apply compost tea every few weeks, or use a mild organic fertilizer, but moderation matters. Excess nitrogen can push the plant to produce large leafy tops, while slowing tuber development below the surface. Eventually, the plant itself signals when the upward cycle should end. When potato plants begin to flower, tuber formation is already well underway underground. At that stage, additional hilling usually stops. The plant shifts its energy toward enlarging the potatoes that have already formed along the buried stem. Several weeks later, the leaves gradually yellow and begin to die back. This is the plant's natural conclusion to the growing season. Allowing the foliage to fade fully gives the tubers time to gain weight and develop stronger skins that store better after harvest. When harvest day arrives, the process is simple. The ties holding the wire cylinder together are cut, and the tower is gently opened. The column collapses outward, and the material spreads across the ground. Potatoes appear at different levels throughout the structure, clean and loosely surrounded by straw and compost. There is no digging through heavy soil. Most can be gathered by hand with very little damage. For many gardeners, the first season with a tower produces somewhere between 40 and 60 pounds of potatoes. With experience, improved compost, and steady watering, higher yields become possible. Under strong growing conditions, the harvest can increase significantly, though the exact result always depends on sunlight, season length, and variety selection. Yet the most valuable lesson of the system is not the tower itself. Some gardeners prefer an even simpler version. Instead of building a structure, seed potatoes can be placed directly on the ground and covered with loose straw. As shoots grow, more straw is added in layers, leaving only the tips exposed. By the end of the season, a mound roughly 2 to 3 feet tall forms, and the harvest is gathered simply by pulling the straw apart. Different tools, same principle. The real mechanism remains unchanged. Potatoes produce tubers along buried stem. When more stem is buried, more opportunities for tuber formation appear. The tower, the straw mound, the compost layers. These are only ways of giving the plant space to follow its natural pattern. Systems like this reflect a quiet shift in thinking. Instead of pushing harder for more output, the goal becomes reducing unnecessary input while allowing biological processes to do more of the work. Once that perspective settles in, the garden itself begins to look different. Space becomes more flexible, effort becomes more focused, and simple observations begin replacing habits that once felt permanent. The potato tower is just one example, but it hints at a larger idea that continues to shape how systems evolve over time. An idea we explore often here on Low Input Living.